Hello and welcome. This is my very first ever history video podcast. So let's see how this works. So anyhow, my inspiration for this little history lesson I'm going to give you today came from the book's Twilight. So most people I know seem to be reading Twilight. Myself, I'm not immune. I've made it through the second book. And anyhow, so I was thinking, vampires have an interesting culture behind them, so I wanted to do a little research and figure out what's going on with vampires, where they came from, what's the stories behind them and everything, and so anyhow, this is what I've put together. So how about I start you off with a little definition of vampires. It actually comes from the Slavic language, and it means like flying being, drinking, or wolf. So, there's kind of three little things that kind of get you an idea of where vampire comes from, just the word and origin. Now, vampires have been throughout history. They're found on cave paintings and all kinds of interesting ways that they pop up throughout culture from time to time. Now, the first written one came from this guy named Lucius Apicius. Yeah, that's right. I can't pronounce his name. Anyhow, he was born 125 to 180 AD or so. Anyhow, he wrote this book called De Asino Ero. It's about these two sisters who end up getting this guy and drinking his blood, and after they like open him up and drink the blood, they like patch him up with this little like sponge, and then he's fine and he doesn't even know he lost the blood. And the next day he's just getting some water, he's drinking out of a river, and when he leans down, like the sponge like falls out, and then he just dies from the blood loss. So that was like the first really written text about vampires. Now, we can find them in ancient Egypt. Actually, it was vampirism was accepted in Egypt. It was seen as okay to drink blood. And then Africa, it was very feared upon. People would drink the blood of their enemies. It was not exactly knit. So, anyhow, and then now for the Romans, I'm going to bring in a guest speaker here to talk about the Romans. So, okay, good, thank you. In Rome, there was female citizens would often drink the blood of fertile women, hoping that their fertile blood would cure their being infirm. Great. So, there you go. You got to get a little history about the Romans. Now, something he left out that I just want to add on to. Now, after a while, this was frowned upon, so they actually outlawed any kind of drinking of the blood, anything like that. So it was outlawed, and they actually employed people like assassins or bounty hunters to go out and find vampires and secret cults that formed once it got outlawed. So these guys that would go around stabbing the vampires and so forth, the whole Van Helsing kind of thing, they had these special daggers that had, it was a knife and then it turned into a crucifix at the top, and they would use those to kill the vampires. Well, these secret cults, well, obviously they're going to be scared of these assassins coming after them. So what they did is they started spreading all these rumors about how drinking the blood gave them special supernatural powers. A lot like these ones that we hear about, that we think when we think vampires, we think, mind reading, shape-shifting, being able to fly, super speed, super strength, all that stuff. And that's all started in Rome. And then, probably the most famous vampire of all, Dracula. Now, Dracula was actually a real 15th century Vlad Tepes. Which translates to, like Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Dracul, is what he's usually known as, and this means the devil. And Vlad the Impaler, he was in Transylvania, where all vampire stuff originates from, and he would call Vlad the Impaler because his primary means of execution, he would take a spear, run a person through the spear, leave them staked to the ground with the spear going through their body, and waiting until they died. And he would wake up and have, somebody being impaled in front of him as he ate his breakfast. So if you can imagine someone, eating their Fruity Pebbles in the morning and having a nice staked person next to them wriggling in pain. He was really messed up, period. And when he was little, he would impale like spiders and stuff like that, and on like little jagged piece of twigs and stuff. I mean, it's just... Anyhow, a lot of mystery surrounding his death, whether he really died. They tried to cut off his head, make sure they drove a stake through his heart just to make sure he was dead. All kinds of superstition behind it. And the people living in Transylvania were so scared of him that they would, try to ward him off the devil, and they would put crucifixes in their lawn and on their front doors to help kind of, you know, keep him away or at bay at least. So another good story is the Spanish conquistadors that came to South Africa. Now granted, we're kind of moving here up through history, but so these Spanish conquistadors, you know, these conquerors, they would seek refuge in caves at night and would try to stay out of, you know, out of the rain, and when it was raining, you know, just in these caves. And then some of the men started to die, strangely enough. And what happened was, while they were sleeping, someone woke up and finally saw these giant bats would come down and feed off of the artery from their neck, this artery right in here, and they would suck the blood out. And then in the morning, no one would find out, and then these people would slowly be dying. Well, what happened was these were giant vampire bats, which that's what vampire bats do. They suck blood, and they'll do it from any kind of animal or human. And when they'd suck the blood out, they had transferred rabies. Now this is back before we knew what rabies was, so didn't really know what was causing this death, and then they would have the whole rabies experience, and then they would die, and then people blamed it on vampires. All right, and then another one here, 1721, this Peter Plogojewicz. I know, bad on the pronunciation. Anyhow, he was about 62, and he had died. He came back several days later and asked his son for food. And his son said no. They found the son dead the next day. Then the neighbors around this house started dying, and it all was from blood loss. So that was kind of a modern-day vampire. This was the first one that the government actually acknowledged and started to seek out and find out what was going on. And these stories, they continue all the way up until present day, and now we see a home for the vampires, especially in the media. I mean, we have Blade, we have Buffy the Vampire Slayer, any of the Anne Rice books, like Interview with the Vampire, and who can forget Twilight. So, anyhow, thought it'd be kind of interesting to learn a little bit more about vampires. So, I'm curious, what do you think? Are vampires real?